Alarms tore through the corridor before I even opened my eyes. I was on my feet before I understood why, one hand slapping the wall panel, the other reaching for the strap of my harness. The deck of the ISV Kestrel shuddered under me, and somewhere above my head, Captain Owen Marsh was already shouting orders through the open comm channel. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. I ran, boots hammering against metal grates, breath fast, mind still catching up to my body. 3 weeks on patrol along the neutral fringe, and nothing had happened. Now, in the space of a single heartbeat, everything had changed. I reached the bridge and dropped into my station beside Ensign Mara Bell, who was already pulling up the tactical display with shaking fingers. "Talk to me," I said. "Distress signal," she answered. "Not one of ours. Alien registry, encrypted, but the translator caught fragments. Something about a royal transport. It's under attack." On the main screen, a shape rotated into view. A long silver vessel, elegant in a way our blocky human ships never were, trailing smoke from a wound along its hull. Around it, 3 smaller ships circled like predators, firing again and again into the same breach, widening it. Captain Marsh stood at the center of the bridge, arms folded, jaw tight. He was a careful man, cautious, the kind of officer who followed protocol because protocol kept people alive. I had served under him for 2 years, and never once seen him break a rule. "Sir," said Mara, "that transport won't hold another minute at that rate of fire." "It's not our fight," Marsh said quietly. "Not to us. To himself." I looked at the screen again. The silver ship's escort had already been destroyed. I could see the wreckage, tumbling debris catching sunlight from the nearby star. Whatever was inside that dying transport, someone wanted it gone badly enough to burn through an honor guard to get it. "Sir," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice came out. "If we don't move now, there won't be anyone left to help." Marsh turned his head, and for a moment, I thought he would order me back to my post and end the conversation there. Instead, he looked past me, at the screen, at the smoke pouring from that broken hull. "Neutral fringe rules of engagement forbid direct intervention in fights that don't involve human vessels," he said, mostly for the record, mostly because someone would ask him later why he did what he did next. "Ensign Hart, tell me why I should ignore 3 decades of treaty language." I didn't have a clever answer. I didn't have any answer that would satisfy a committee back on Earth. All I had was the plain fact sitting in front of us. "Because they're dying, sir. And we can stop it." Marsh held my gaze for 1 long second. Then he turned toward the helm. "Bring us in. Full burn. Weapons hot. Hail them once. Tell them to stand down. If they don't listen, we make them listen." The bridge exploded into motion. Consoles lit up. The Kestrel's engines groaned as we accelerated, the stars outside the viewport smearing into thin lines of light. My pulse hammered in my ears, louder than the alarms, louder than the shouted status reports around me. 30 seconds to firing range, called the weapons officer, a broad-shouldered woman named Grace Linden, who also doubled as our chief medic. She had 2 jobs on this ship, and somehow excelled at both. "Hail sent," said Mara. No response. "They're not going to answer a warning shot with words," Marsh said. "Grace, target their engines. Disable, don't destroy." "Copy that." The Kestrel shook as our forward cannons fired, twin streaks of light crossing the black distance in an instant. One of the 3 attacking ships spun wildly, its rear section blooming with fire before the vacuum smothered the flame. The other 2 broke formation, peeling away from the wounded transport to face us instead. "They're turning on us," I said. "Good," Marsh said. "Better us than that ship." The next few minutes blurred together the way real danger always does. Faster than thought, faster than fear. Weapons fire lit up the black outside the viewport like fireworks with teeth. The Kestrel rolled hard to starboard, dodging a spread of projectiles that would have torn through our shields. I gripped the edge of my console so hard my knuckles went pale. "Shields at 70%, Grace called out. "Return fire," Marsh ordered. Our second volley caught one of the attacking ships across its midsection. It didn't explode, not dramatically, not the way it happens in old films. It simply went dark, drifting, its engines dead. The third ship, seeing its companions crippled, broke off and fled into the black, faster than we could pursue. Silence settled over the bridge. broken only by the low hum of the engines and the ragged sound of my own breathing. "Status on the transport," Marsh said. "Still bleeding atmosphere," Mara answered, eyes fixed on her display. "Hull integrity failing. If there's anyone alive in there, they don't have long." Marsh didn't hesitate this time. "Hart, Lyndon, suit up. You're going over." I stood so fast my chair nearly tipped. Grace was already moving, shedding her weapons station duties to another crewman and heading for the equipment locker. I followed her, my heart hammering with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite excitement. Somewhere in between, the feeling you get right before you do something you can't take back. We reached the airlock in under 2 minutes, sealed into our suits, the transport's dying hull growing larger and larger in the small viewport as our shuttle crossed the gap between ships. Up close, the damage was worse than it had looked from a distance. Whole sections of the outer plating had been peeled away, exposing blackened frames and severed cabling. Warning lights blinked erratically along what remained of the hull, a dying heartbeat. "Docking in 10 seconds, said the shuttle pilot, a quiet young man named Felix Doran, who had never flown anything more dangerous than a supply run before today. "Steady, Felix," Grace said. "You've got this." The shuttle connected with a shudder and a hiss of equalizing pressure. The moment the airlock cycled open, the smell hit me even through the suit filters. Burnt metal, something acrid and sharp that I didn't recognize and didn't want to. Inside, the transport was chaos. Emergency lighting cast everything in dim red, flickering unevenly. Debris floated in the low gravity, pieces of broken furniture, shattered glass, fragments of a wall mural depicting some alien landscape I had never seen, and bodies. Too many bodies, still and silent among the wreckage. "This way," Grace said, pointing toward a corridor where the emergency lights still held steady, a sign that some power remained. "If anyone survived, they will be near a working system." We moved fast, weapons drawn but lowered, scanning every doorway. My translator earpiece crackled to life, picking up a faint transmission, weak and broken. "Help! Someone! Please!" The voice was alien, but the fear in it needed no translation. We followed the signal to a sealed compartment near the ship's center, the kind of room built to be the last line of defense in an emergency. Grace worked the manual release while I kept watch, and when the door finally hissed open, what we found stopped me cold for just a moment. A young alien woman lay crumpled against the far wall, one arm bent at a wrong angle, a dark wound seeping through torn clothing at her side. Her skin held a faint silver sheen, catching the red emergency light in strange, beautiful patterns, like something carved from starlight. Around her, 3 others lay unmoving. Whether dead or unconscious, I could not tell yet. Her eyes found mine the instant the door opened, wide and glassy with pain, but sharp too, aware, assessing me even in that state. She said something in her own language, too fast for the translator to catch cleanly, but I understood the tone well enough. Fear, and underneath it, something that might have been disbelief. "We're not here to hurt you," I said, moving slowly, hands visible. "We're here to help." Grace was already beside me, scanner in hand, running it over the girl's injuries with practiced speed. "Internal bleeding," she said. "She won't survive transport without stabilization. I need to work here, now." "Do it," I said, and turned to check the others while Grace opened her medical kit. The 3 companions were dead. I confirmed it quickly, quietly, and said nothing more about it, focusing instead on keeping watch at the door while Grace worked. Time became strange in that dim red room, stretching and compressing at once. I heard Grace murmuring instructions to herself, the soft hiss of a sealant applicator, the alien girl's ragged breathing slowly, gradually, evening out. "She's stable," Grace finally said, relief cutting through the tension in her voice. "Barely. We need to move her now." I knelt down and gathered the girl into my arms, as gently as I could manage in the bulk of my suit. She was lighter than I expected, and up close, I could see the fine, almost crystalline patterns etched across her skin, markings that seemed to shift faintly in the low light, though maybe that was just my imagination working overtime. Her eyes opened again as I lifted her, meeting mine with a clarity that startled me. She said something else, quieter this time, and the translator caught enough of it to render a rough meaning in my ear. "Why?" she whispered. Why would you come for us? I did not have a good answer for her either, not then. All I could say was the truth. Because you needed help. That's enough of a reason where I'm from. She stared at me a moment longer, as if trying to decide whether to believe something so simple, before her eyes fluttered shut again, consciousness slipping away. We carried her and what few survivors we found, back through the wreckage, back across the gap between the dying transport and our waiting shuttle. Behind us, the alien ship groaned and settled, its structure finally giving way to the damage it had taken, though by then we were already clear, already burning back toward the Kestrel with our fragile cargo. I did not know it yet, kneeling there in the shuttle bay with the girl's pulse weak but steady beneath my fingers. But the decision to answer that distress signal had already set something in motion far larger than any of us understood. Something that would ripple outward across a dozen alien worlds, shake governments that had stood for 1,000 years, and mark the beginning of a story the galaxy would tell for generations. All I knew, in that moment, was that we had saved a life. I had no idea whose life it was. The medical bay lights flared bright white the moment we carried her through the doors, and Grace was shouting orders before I even set her down on the table. Get me a full scan, now. Cross-reference her biology against anything we have on file. I need to know what I'm working with before I do anything else. The Kestrel's small medical staff moved fast around her. 3 crew members who had trained for human injuries, human anatomy, human blood, now suddenly facing something none of them had ever studied. I stood back against the wall, still in half my suit, watching monitors flicker with readings that made no sense to me, strange curves and numbers scrolling past faster than I could follow. Her heart rate is dropping, said one of the medics, a nervous young man named Colin Ashby. I see it, Grace snapped, already pulling instruments from a tray. Her internal structure isn't like ours. 3 separate chambers, doing the work of one heart. If I treat this like a human wound, I could kill her. Then don't treat it like a human wound, I said. Grace shot me a look that told me clearly this was not the moment for advice, and I raised both hands and stepped back further, giving her the space she needed. She worked with a kind of focused calm I had only seen from her twice before, both times when lives hung on the edge of a decision made in seconds rather than minutes. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I watched the numbers on the monitor rise and fall, each dip sending a fresh jolt of fear through my chest, even though I had no real understanding of what I was looking at. All I understood was Grace's expression, tight with concentration, and the sound of her voice, steady even when her hands moved fast. Sealing the internal wound, she said. Colin, hold pressure here. Steady, steady. The alien girl's body arched slightly on the table, a soft sound escaping her that might have been pain, even across the gap between our species. I found myself stepping forward without meaning to, standing close enough that I could see the fine detail of the markings across her skin, patterns that pulsed faintly with something like a heartbeat of their own. She's stabilizing, Grace finally said, and the tension in the room broke all at once, a collective breath released. Vitals climbing. I think we got her in time. I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. She's not out of danger yet, Grace added, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of one gloved hand. But she's not dying anymore either. That's something. Captain Marsh appeared in the doorway a moment later, still in his uniform from the bridge, his expression unreadable in the way that only came out during a crisis. He looked at the girl on the table, then at Grace, then at me. Report, he said. She'll live, Grace said, assuming her body keeps responding the way it has been. I need time to run a full analysis before I can say more than that. And the others we recovered? 2 survivors from the crew section, both stable, minor injuries. The 3 found with her did not make it. Marsh nodded slowly, absorbing the information the way he absorbed everything, without visible reaction, filing it away for later. Then his eyes moved back to the girl on the table, studying her for a long moment. Do we know who she is? Not yet, Grace said. Her clothing suggests status, the quality of the fabric, the craftsmanship of what jewelry survived the attack. Whoever she isn't ordinary crew. I thought about the wrecked transport, the honor guard that had died protecting it, the desperate speed of the attack that had torn through defenses meant to withstand exactly this kind of assault. Something about all of it sat wrong in my stomach, a feeling I could not name yet, but recognized as the shape of trouble. "Sir," I said, "that attack wasn't random. 3 ships, coordinated, hitting a transport with a full honor guard. Someone wanted whoever's on this table gone badly enough to plan for it." Marsh's eyes flicked to me, considering. "You may be right, Ensign, which means we may have just made ourselves a target too." The words hung in the air, heavier than the ship's recycled atmosphere. I glanced at the girl on the table, her chest now rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm, and wondered exactly what kind of storm we had pulled ourselves into the middle of. We did not have to wonder long. 3 hours later, while the girl remained unconscious in the medical bay under Grace's careful watch, Mara's console lit up with an incoming transmission, flagged as priority. Origin unknown but routed through channels that suggested significant power behind it. "Captain, you need to see this," she called across the bridge. Marsh crossed the room in 4 long strides. I followed at a respectful distance, curiosity outweighing caution, and watched as the main screen resolved into the image of an alien official, tall and imposing, his features sharp and angular, his expression carrying the particular coldness of someone used to being obeyed instantly. "This is Magistrate Ilvex Cade of the Thren Compact," the alien said, his translated voice flat and precise. "You are in possession of compact property, recovered from a destroyed vessel. You will surrender this property immediately, for retrieval by our forces." The bridge went quiet. I felt something tighten in my chest at the word property, applied so casually to a living, breathing person who had nearly died hours earlier. Marsh's expression did not change, but his voice, when he answered, carried an edge I had rarely heard from him. "We do not have property aboard this vessel, Magistrate. We have survivors. Human medical staff are currently treating them for injuries sustained in an unprovoked attack." "You misunderstand the situation," Cade said, his tone sharpening. "The individual you recovered is not simply a survivor. She is a person of significant standing within the compact hierarchy, and her recovery is a matter of state importance. Return her to our custody, and we will overlook this breach of neutral fringe protocol." "Overlook," Marsh repeated, and something in the word made my skin prickle. "I was not aware we required your permission to save a dying woman, Magistrate." The alien's expression flickered, something calculating behind his eyes. "Captain, I urge you to reconsider your position. The Thren Compact does not respond well to interference in matters of internal succession." Succession. The word landed in the room like a dropped weight. Marsh's eyes narrowed slightly, and I saw Mara's fingers pause over her console, catching the implication as quickly as I had.
"Are you telling me,"
Marsh said slowly,
"that the woman my crew pulled out of a burning ship is a claimant to your throne?"
Cade's silence answered the question more clearly than any words could have. "I am telling you," he finally said, "that this is a compact matter, and human involvement, however well-intentioned, complicates a situation you do not understand. Return her, and this incident can be resolved quietly, without further complication for either of our peoples." Marsh glanced toward me, just briefly, and I understood the question in his eyes even though he did not voice it. "What do you think?" I stepped forward before I could stop myself. "Magistrate, with respect, the people who attacked that transport did not seem interested in a quiet resolution. They seemed interested in making sure she never reached wherever she was going. If we hand her back into a system that could not protect her the first time, how do we know she survives the second attempt?" Cade's eyes shifted to me, appraising, and something like irritation crossed his sharp features. "You are a junior officer," he said. "This conversation does not concern you. It concerns anyone who has to look at her while she's fighting to stay alive on our medical table," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Sir, with respect." Marsh did not correct me. He did not send me back to my post. Instead, he turned back to the screen, and his voice, when he spoke again, left no room for negotiation. "Magistrate Cade, until she is well enough to travel, and well enough to choose her own path forward, she remains under human protection. If your government has a problem with that, I invite you to take it up through proper diplomatic channels, rather than demands issued to a scout vessel 3 hours after an assassination attempt." The word assassination hit the transmission like a blade, and for a moment Cade's carefully composed expression cracked entirely, revealing something colder and more dangerous underneath. "You have no idea what you have started. he said quietly, and then the transmission cut, leaving the bridge in a silence that felt heavier than before. Marsh exhaled slowly and turned to face the room. "Well," he said, "that went about as well as I expected." "Sir," Mara said carefully, "should we be worried?" "Yes," Marsh said, without hesitation. "We should be very worried. But we made the right call, and I intend to stand by it." I found myself staring at the now dark screen, replaying the magistrate's words in my head. A person of significant standing within the compact hierarchy, a claimant to the throne. The attack had not been random violence. It had been a calculated attempt to remove someone from power before she ever had the chance to claim it. And we had stopped it, entirely by accident, simply by refusing to let a dying stranger die. I made my way back down to the medical bay a while later, drawn by a restlessness I could not quite explain. Grace was still there, monitoring the readings on her patient, though the tension in her shoulders had eased somewhat as the girl's condition continued to stabilize. "How is she?" I asked. "Improving," Grace said. "Her body is doing most of the work now. Whatever species she is, they heal fast once the initial crisis passes." She glanced at me, a knowing look crossing her face. "You heard the transmission. Word travels fast. It's a small ship, Caleb." She turned back to her monitors. "You really think handing her back would have gotten her killed?" I thought about the wrecked transport, the honor guard reduced to drifting debris. The desperate speed of an attack meant to look random but clearly was not. "I think someone wanted her dead badly enough to burn through her entire escort to make it happen," I said. "And I think whoever sent that magistrate to demand her back might be exactly the people who wanted her dead in the first place." Grace was quiet for a moment, considering that. "That's a dangerous thing to be right about," she finally said. "Yeah," I agreed, looking down at the girl on the table, her breathing slow and even now, her silver skin catching the soft light of the medical bay in a way that made her look less like a stranger and more like something out of a story I had not finished reading yet. "It really is." Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found mine across the room. She did not speak, not yet, but something passed between us in that silent moment, a recognition, an acknowledgement of everything that had already changed and everything still to come. Whatever storm we had walked into by answering that distress signal, I understood then that there would be no walking back out of it. We were in this now, all the way. Someone tried to board the Kestrel on the second night. I woke to the sound of my door alarm shrieking, a bright red light flashing across the ceiling of my quarters, and I was pulling on my boots before my mind had even finished processing the words coming through the ship-wide comm. "Security breach, Deck 3. All available personnel respond." Deck 3, Medical Bay. I ran faster than I had ever run in my life, weapon drawn before I reached the corridor, boots pounding against metal as I sprinted past crew members, stumbling out of their own quarters in confusion. My heart hammered against my ribs, one thought looping over and over in my mind. She's still recovering. She can't defend herself. Not yet. I reached the medical bay to find two security officers already wrestling with an intruder near the maintenance access hatch, a figure in dark, nondescript clothing that marked no obvious allegiance, moving with a speed and precision that told me this was no random opportunist. This was someone trained. "Hart, cover the door," one of the officers shouted, and I moved without thinking, positioning myself between the struggle and the bed where the alien girl lay, her eyes open now, wide with alarm, trying to push herself upright despite Grace's hands attempting to hold her still. The intruder broke free of the officer's grip for one terrifying second, lunging toward the medical bay, and I raised my weapon, every instinct screaming at me to stop the threat before it reached her. But the security team recovered fast, tackling the figure to the deck before I had to make that choice, pinning them down as backup arrived from further down the corridor. It was over in under a minute. It felt like an hour. "Secure them!" Marsh's voice cut through the comm, sharp with an anger I rarely heard from him. "I want to know who sent them and how they got aboard my ship." I lowered my weapon slowly, my hands not quite steady, and turned to find the alien girl staring at me across the room, her expression a mixture of fear and something else. Something like recognition of a danger she understood far better than I did. "They came for me," she said, her translated voice quiet, but clear, the first coherent words I had heard her speak. Even here, even now. Not on my ship, I said, and I meant it with a certainty that surprised me. Grace finished securing the room, checking the girl's vitals with quick, practiced hands, murmuring reassurances, even as her own face betrayed how shaken she was by how close the intrusion had come to reaching her patient. "How?" Grace finally asked, looking at me. "Does someone get aboard a moving warship in deep space without anyone noticing until they're already inside?" It was a good question, and I did not like any of the answers that came to mind. We got our answer within the hour, delivered by a grim-faced security chief named Owen Delacroix, who found Marsh and me in the small conference room just off the bridge, a datapad clutched in his hand like something that might bite him. The intruder had compact tech, he said, without preamble. Stealth field generator, military grade, not something you buy on any open market. And this. He set a small device on the table, blackened and partially melted, clearly destroyed deliberately before capture could yield useful information. "A tracking beacon," Delacroix continued. "Planted somewhere on our hull during the rescue operation, most likely. It's how they knew exactly where to breach." Marsh's jaw tightened. "During the rescue," he repeated, meaning whoever attacked that transport in the first place anticipated we might interfere and planned for it. "That's my read too," Delacroix said. "This wasn't opportunistic. Whoever is behind this has resources, patience, and enough foresight to plant contingencies before the first shot was even fired." I felt a chill settle over me that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature controls. We had not stumbled into a random act of violence. We had walked directly into the middle of something planned, something with layers we were only beginning to see. "What did the intruder say?" I asked. "Anything useful?" "Nothing," Delacroix said, professional. "Won't speak a word, even under standard interrogation protocols. Whoever trained them well." Marsh rubbed a hand across his face, the exhaustion of the last 2 days finally showing through his composed exterior. "We need answers," he said, "and I think there's only one place we're going to find them." He looked at me, and I understood immediately where this was going. "She's still recovering, sir," I said. "I know, but she's also the only person aboard this ship who actually understands what we've walked into. We can protect her better if we understand what we're protecting her from." I found her awake when I entered the medical bay a short while later, propped up against a stack of pillows Grace had arranged for her, her silver skin looking healthier than it had even a day before, the strange markings across her arms pulsing with a steadier, calmer rhythm now. She watched me approach with an intensity that made me feel, for a moment, like I was the one under examination rather than her. "You're the one who carried me," she said, before I could speak, "from the transport." "Yes," I said, surprised she remembered anything from those chaotic minutes. "Ensign Caleb Hart." "Caleb Hart," she repeated, testing the shape of the name. "I am Saris Vantien, though where I am from, that name comes with considerably more weight attached to it than you likely realize." "The magistrate mentioned something about a claim to your throne," I said carefully. Something flickered across her face, a complicated mixture of grief and resolve. "My mother is the current sovereign of the Thren Compact," she said. "I am her only heir, or I was, before someone decided that inheritance was inconvenient enough to justify murder." The words landed with a weight that made the room feel smaller. "Someone within your own government," I said slowly, putting together pieces I had been circling since the attack. "Not an outside enemy." Saris's eyes met mine, sharp despite her weakened state. "You understand quickly for someone your people would call primitive," she said, and though the words stung slightly, I could hear it was not meant as an insult from her, more an observation about how her people viewed mine. "Yes, the attack came from within. My uncle, Lord Kaelmor Dre, has coveted the throne for decades. My mother's health has been failing. I suspect he decided he could not wait for nature to take its course." "And now he knows you survived," I said, "which means he'll try again."
"Undoubtedly."
She said it with a calm that unsettled me more than fear would have. "Which is why I cannot stay here, Ensign Hart. Every moment I remain aboard your vessel, I place your crew in danger alongside my own." "With respect," I said, "the intruder who tried to reach you tonight suggests danger already found us." Sending you back into a system that couldn't protect you the first time doesn't sound like it solves that problem. She studied me for a long moment, something in her expression shifting, softening slightly, though the sharp intelligence behind her eyes never wavered. You argue like someone who has already decided to keep me here, she said. I argue like someone who watched you almost die twice in 2 days, I said. Once from the attack, once from whoever walked onto my ship tonight to finish the job. I'd like a say in whether there's a third attempt. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile touched the corner of her mouth, quickly suppressed but not quite fast enough for me to miss it. Your captain will not appreciate you making promises on behalf of his ship, she said. My captain already made the call 3 hours after we pulled you out of that wreck, I said. He told your magistrate you stay under our protection until you're ready to choose your own path. I'm just agreeing with him. Saris was quiet for a moment, studying me with an expression I could not quite read. Somewhere between calculation and something warmer, something I did not yet have a name for. Then I will tell you what I know, she finally said, and you can decide for yourself whether your captain's promise is one your people are prepared to keep. Over the next hour, she told us everything. The political tensions simmering beneath the surface of the Thren Compact for years, her uncle's careful accumulation of allies within the military, and the merchant guilds, the way her mother's illness had created a vacuum of authority that ambitious men were eager to fill. She spoke of a government far more fractured than its polished exterior suggested, held together by tradition and fear rather than genuine loyalty, waiting for the right crack to shatter entirely. By the time she finished, Marsh had joined us, standing near the doorway with his arms folded, absorbing every detail with the same careful attention he gave to any tactical briefing. If what you're telling us is accurate, he finally said, your uncle isn't going to stop with one failed attempt and one failed infiltration. He's going to escalate. Yes, Saris agreed simply. He has invested too much to retreat now. My survival is a threat to everything he has built toward. Then we have a problem, Marsh said, because this ship is not equipped to fight a war against an entire government. No, Saris said, but perhaps a war will not be necessary. My mother still holds the throne, weakened as she is. If I can reach her, if I can expose my uncle's involvement in the attack, the Compact's own laws would demand his removal. And if you can't reach her? I asked. Saris's expression darkened, just slightly. Then this becomes considerably more complicated for everyone involved, she said, including your people. Marsh exchanged a look with me, one that carried the weight of a decision already forming between us, without either of us needing to say it aloud. We had pulled a single thread 3 days ago, answering a distress call because it was the right thing to do. Now that thread had unraveled into something far larger, a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of an alien government, and somehow, impossibly, our small scout ship had become the last line of defense standing between a rightful heir and the men who wanted her dead. We'll get you home, Marsh finally said. But we're doing this carefully, and we're doing this together. No unnecessary risks. Saris inclined her head slightly, something like gratitude passing across her features. Careful has not served me particularly well thus far, she said, but I appreciate the sentiment, Captain. I stayed behind after Marsh left, watching Saris settle back against her pillows, exhaustion finally catching up with her despite the adrenaline of the conversation. Her eyes found mine one more time before sleep claimed her. Thank you, she said quietly, for arguing on my behalf. Not many would have. Get some rest, I said. You're going to need it for whatever comes next. She closed her eyes, and I stood there a moment longer than necessary, watching the steady rhythm of her breathing, aware in some quiet corner of my mind that whatever came next would change far more than just her fate. It would change all of ours. 3 warships dropped out of nowhere directly into our flight path, and for one heart-stopping second I thought Lord Dre had found us already. Identify unknown contacts, Marsh barked, already moving toward the tactical display, the calm of the last 2 days evaporating instantly. Thren Compact military markings, Mara called back, her voice tight. Transponders read as a border patrol wing, not affiliated with any private faction we've flagged. That doesn't mean they're friendly, Marsh said. Shields up, but hold weapons. We came here to deliver her home, not start a war getting there. I stood near the back of the bridge, close enough to watch the screen, my hand resting on the back of a chair to steady myself against the sudden spike of adrenaline. Saris had insisted on being present for this, despite Grace's objections about her still healing injuries, and she stood beside me now, her expression carefully neutral, even as tension radiated off her in waves I could almost feel. "They will want proof of my identity before allowing us through," she said quietly. "Border Patrol answers to my mother's crown, not directly to my uncle. If they are loyal, this could work in our favor. And if they're not?" I asked. "Then we will know rather quickly," she said, with a calm that did not entirely mask the fear underneath it. The lead vessel hailed us, and the bridge fell silent as the transmission connected, resolving into the image of a weathered alien officer, with deep-set eyes, and a uniform marked with insignia I did not recognize. "Unidentified human vessel. You are entering restricted compact border space. State your business immediately." Marsh stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "This is Captain Owen Marsh, of the human vessel Kestrel. We carry a survivor of an attack on a compact royal transport, requesting safe passage to deliver her home." The officer's eyes narrowed, skepticism plain on his features, until Saris moved forward into the transmission's field of view, standing tall despite the effort it clearly cost her. "Commander Yorvin," she said, and something in her tone carried an authority that seemed to reach through the screen itself. "It is Saris Vantien. I require passage to my mother's court, and I require it discreetly." The officer's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, and finally something like relief so profound it seemed to age him 10 years in an instant. "Your Highness," he said, his voice suddenly rough, "we were told you perished in the attack. The entire fleet has been in mourning for 3 days. Reports of my death were premature," Saris said, "and I suspect deliberately encouraged by parties who preferred them to remain true." Understanding dawned across the commander's face, followed swiftly by something colder, harder. "You are suggesting the attack was not the work of border raiders, as we were told." "I am suggesting considerably more than that, Commander. But this is not a conversation for open channels. I need safe escort to my mother, and I need it before word reaches certain parties that I am still alive." The commander did not hesitate. "Your Highness, it would be my honor. We will escort your vessel personally. No transmission of this encounter will leave my ship until you are safely delivered." The transmission ended, and the bridge exhaled as one, the tension breaking like a held breath finally released. Saris sagged slightly, and I caught her arm without thinking, steadying her before she could stumble. "That went considerably better than I feared," she admitted, a note of genuine relief coloring her voice for the first time since I had met her. "You trust him?" Marsh asked. "Commander Yorvin has served my family for 30 years, Saris said. "If there is anyone in the compact fleet I trust without hesitation, it is him." We fell into formation behind the patrol wing, and for the first time since the rescue, something like calm settled over the ship, fragile and temporary though we all understood it to be. I found Saris later that evening in the small observation lounge near the ship's stern, staring out at the passing stars with an expression I could not quite read. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to intrude, but she noticed me anyway, her sharp senses picking up my presence before I said a word. "Come in, Ensign Hart," she said, without turning. "I find I would prefer company to my own thoughts tonight." I settled into the seat across from her, the silence between us, comfortable, in a way I had not expected, given everything that had happened. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You may ask. I make no promises regarding the answer. Why does it surprise everyone so much that we helped you, your magistrate, your commander, even you, that first night? Everyone acts like it's the strangest thing they've ever encountered." Saris considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because it is," she finally said. "Among the older species of this galaxy, help is rarely given without calculation. Every alliance carries a price. Every act of kindness conceals an expectation of return. We have built civilizations so old and so cautious that generosity itself has become a kind of currency, carefully spent and carefully tracked." "That sounds exhausting," I said. A faint smile touched her lips. "It is efficient. It is also, I am beginning to suspect, rather hollow." She turned to look at me directly. Your captain risked his ship, his crew, and considerable diplomatic consequence to save a stranger, whose only value to him was that she was dying, and he could stop it. There was no calculation in that decision, was there? Not really, I admitted. We just saw someone who needed help. That was the whole thought process. That is either the most foolish thing I have ever heard, Saris said, or the most remarkable. I confess, I have not yet decided which. Maybe it's both, I offered. She laughed then, soft and genuine, a sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised me. Perhaps it is, she agreed. Tell me about your people, Ensign Hart. The Compact's records on humanity are sparse and largely unflattering. I would prefer to learn from someone who actually knows the truth of it. So I told her, about Earth, about the long, difficult history of a species that had nearly destroyed itself more than once before finally learning to look outward, instead of only inward. About the wars we had fought and the peace we had eventually built from the wreckage of them. Imperfect and ongoing, but real. About the drive that had sent us out into the stars barely a century after we had first learned to fly, restless and curious in ways that apparently unsettled species, who had been navigating the galaxy for millennia longer than we had existed as a spacefaring people at all. Saris listened with an intensity that made me feel, for the first time, truly seen by someone from beyond my own world. You speak of your history without shame, she observed at one point, even the parts that clearly still cause you pain. Hiding from it doesn't make it less true, I said. Better to understand where we came from than pretend it never happened. Among my people, Saris said slowly, history is curated, sanitized, presented as an unbroken line of wisdom and inevitability. I begin to wonder how much of what I was taught to believe about my own civilization was ever entirely honest. Maybe that's something we could actually teach you, I said. How to be honest about the ugly parts too. Something in her expression shifted, thoughtful and a little sad. Perhaps, or perhaps you will simply confirm what I have already begun to suspect on my own. She looked at me again, more carefully this time. You are unlike anyone I have encountered before, Ensign Hart. Your people, all of you. You do not calculate the way we calculate. You do not weigh a life against its usefulness before deciding whether it deserves saving. Should we? No, she said, quiet and certain. I do not think you should. I think, perhaps, the galaxy has simply forgotten that there is another way to be. We sat together a while longer, the stars sliding past outside the viewport, the patrol escort a steady, reassuring presence on the tactical display. I did not know, in that quiet hour, how much that conversation would matter later, how the seeds of understanding planted between two people from worlds separated by more than distance would eventually grow into something that reshaped the relationship between our entire civilizations. I only knew that something had shifted between us, subtle but unmistakable, the beginning of an understanding that went beyond duty, beyond rescue, into something neither of us had a name for yet. Neither of us spoke of it directly, but I do not think either of us needed to. Soldiers surrounded me the moment I stepped off the shuttle, weapons raised, voices shouting commands in a language my translator struggled to keep pace with. We had barely touched down on the capital world of the Thren Compact, barely had time to take in the towering silver spires of a city built across 1,000 years of history, before chaos erupted around the landing platform. I raised my hands slowly, heart pounding, watching Grace and two of our security officers do the same beside me, all of us surrounded by armed figures wearing insignia I did not recognize, distinct from Commander Yorvin's loyal escort. Stand down, Saris's voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding, as she stepped forward from behind me, still moving carefully from her injuries, but radiating an authority that made even the armed soldiers hesitate. I am Saris Vantiane, and I order you to lower your weapons immediately. For a moment, it seemed like it might work. Then a figure pushed through the ring of soldiers, an older alien man with sharp, calculating eyes and a bearing that reminded me uncomfortably of Magistrate Cade, and I understood before he spoke a single word that this was Lord Kaelmor Dre. Niece, he said, his voice smooth and full of false warmth that did not reach his eyes. How relieved I am to see you alive. The whole court has mourned you these past days. Spare me the performance, uncle, Saris said coldly. We both know precisely how relieved you are. A flicker of something dangerous crossed Dre's face before he smoothed it away, turning instead toward me with an expression of manufactured concern. This is the human who claims to have saved you, he said. How fortunate that a primitive species happened to be in exactly the right place to rescue the heir to the compact throne. Some might call that suspicious timing, wouldn't you agree, Commander Yorvin? Yorvin, standing nearby with his own loyal soldiers, stiffened visibly at the implication. Lord Dre, the human vessel responded to a distress signal. There is no evidence of coordination. No evidence yet, Dre said smoothly, but I think it prudent that we investigate thoroughly before allowing an alien species unprecedented access to the heir of our throne. For all we know, this rescue was staged, a manipulation designed to insert human influence directly into the highest levels of our government. The accusation landed like a physical blow, and I felt the soldiers around me tense, their weapons still raised, their suspicion visibly hardening at Dre's words. I understood immediately what he was doing, twisting the truth of the rescue into something sinister, planting doubt before Saris could expose his own involvement in the attack that had nearly killed her. That's not what happened, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We answered a distress call because people were dying, nothing more calculated than that. How convenient that you would say so, Dre replied, his smile thin and cold. Take the human into custody for questioning. We must be thorough in matters of the Crown's security. No. Saris's voice cut through the tension like a blade, and she stepped directly between me and the advancing soldiers, her small frame somehow commanding the entire platform's attention despite her injuries. You will not touch him, she said. Ensign Hart and his crew saved my life at considerable risk to their own. I will not stand by while you twist their courage into an accusation to serve your own ambitions. Ambitions, Dre repeated, feigning offense. Niece, I only wish to protect the throne from outside influence. You wish to protect your own position, Saris said, which is threatened considerably now that I am alive to tell my mother precisely who arranged the attack on my transport. The platform fell utterly silent. Dre's expression flickered, just for an instant, something cold and calculating replacing the false warmth entirely. That is a serious accusation, niece. I would advise caution before making it publicly, unless you have proof to support such a claim. I have survivors, Saris said. I have a tracking beacon recovered from a human vessel that led an assassin directly to my location, technology accessible only to those with military connections deep within our own government. And I have you, standing here, more concerned with detaining the man who saved my life than with finding the people responsible for trying to end it. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. I watched Dre's carefully constructed composure strain under the weight of Saris's words, watched the soldiers around the platform exchange uncertain glances, their loyalty suddenly less clear than it had been moments before. This is not the place for such accusations, Dre finally said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Your mother's court will hear this matter properly, with appropriate evidence and appropriate process. Good, Saris said. Then let us go there immediately, uncle, and let my mother decide for herself who deserves suspicion and who deserves gratitude. Dre held her gaze a moment longer, something dark and dangerous passing behind his eyes, before he finally gestured for his soldiers to lower their weapons. As you wish, niece, he said. I look forward to the court's judgment. He turned and left the platform with his soldiers falling into step behind him, and I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding, my hands finally unclenching from the fists they had formed at my sides. That was too close, Grace muttered beside me. He's not finished, Saris said quietly, watching her uncle's retreating figure. That was merely his opening move. He will not allow this matter to be settled so easily. Commander Yorvin approached, his expression grim. Your Highness, I do not trust the loyalty of every soldier on this platform. Word will reach Lord Dre's allies quickly now that you have accused him openly. I am aware, Saris said, which is precisely why we must reach my mother before he has time to prepare a counter to accusations he clearly did not expect me to make so soon. We moved quickly through the city after that, Yorvin's loyal soldiers forming a tight perimeter around our group as we made our way toward the palace. I walked close beside Saris, watching the way her eyes tracked every shadow, every unfamiliar face in the crowds that parted around our procession, and I understood that the danger here had not lessened simply because we had survived the landing platform. If anything, it had only just begun. The palace itself rose ahead of us, a structure of impossible height and elegance, silver spires catching the light of the alien sun in ways that would have taken my breath away under any other circumstances. But my attention remained fixed on the tension radiating from Saris beside me, the careful way she held herself, the strain visible beneath her composed exterior. "You didn't have to defend me like that," I said quietly, as we approached the palace gates. "Your uncle could have made things considerably harder for you by pushing the accusation." "He could have," Saris agreed, "but I have watched you and your crew risk everything for a stranger with nothing to gain, Ensign Hart. I was not about to allow my uncle to twist that courage into a crime, simply because it was politically convenient for him to do so." "Thank you," I said, "for standing up for me back there." Saris glanced at me, something warm and complicated passing across her features despite the tension of the moment. "Do not thank me yet," she said. "We have not yet reached my mother, and I fear the true difficulty of this day has only just begun." She was right, of course. As we passed through the palace gates and into the cool, shadowed halls beyond, I felt the weight of the coming confrontation settling over all of us, heavier with every step. Somewhere within these silver walls waited a dying queen, a court full of uncertain loyalties, and a truth about murder and betrayal that would either save Saris's claim to the throne or destroy everything we had risked to protect. I had no way of knowing, walking those ancient halls beside her, that the true nightmare Dre had planned was still waiting to unfold, that the accusation on the landing platform had been nothing more than a distraction, buying time for something far more dangerous already set into motion. We reached the heart of the palace just as the alarms began to sound. The floor shook beneath us as the first explosion tore through the lower levels of the palace, and Commander Yorvin was shouting orders before the dust had even settled, his soldiers forming a defensive ring around Saris with practiced speed. "Coordinated strike," he called out, pressing a hand to his ear as reports flooded in through his comm. "Multiple breach points. This was planned, Your Highness. He knew we would come straight here."
Of course he did,
Saris said, her voice tight but controlled, despite the chaos erupting around us. He could not risk me reaching my mother with the truth. This was always his true plan, wasn't it? The accusation on the platform bought him time to move his forces into position. I stayed close to her, my weapon drawn, scanning the smoke-filled corridor ahead of us for any sign of movement. Grace and our security officers had formed up around us as well, human and compact soldiers working together with an urgency that erased whatever species divide might have existed between us in calmer circumstances. "We need to reach the Queen," Yorvin said. "If Dre's forces get to her before we do, this becomes a matter of a completed coup rather than a foiled one." "Then we move," Saris said, already pushing forward despite the danger, and I found myself falling into step beside her, without hesitation, some part of me having already decided, somewhere between the rescue and this moment, that I would follow her into whatever came next. We fought our way through corridors filled with smoke and chaos, past palace guards uncertain of which side to defend, past frightened staff fleeing toward exits that might or might not still be safe. Twice we encountered armed resistance, soldiers loyal to Dre attempting to block our path, and twice Yorvin's forces cleared the way with a speed and coordination that spoke to years of training, now finally being tested in the way it was meant to be. "Ensign Hart," Grace called out at one point, ducking behind a shattered pillar as weapons fire lit up the corridor ahead of us. "I hope you have a plan beyond running directly into the most dangerous part of the palace." "The plan is, we get her to her mother before her uncle finishes what he started," I called back. "That's the whole plan." "Wonderful," Grace muttered, but she moved forward anyway, and I loved her a little for that in the moment, for the simple, unwavering courage that had carried our entire crew through everything since we first answered that distress call. We reached the throne room's outer chamber just as a final wave of Dre's soldiers made their stand, and for a few brutal minutes, the fighting grew fierce enough that I lost track of everything except the immediate necessity of staying alive and keeping Saris alive beside me. When the chamber finally fell silent, the opposing soldiers either fled or subdued, I found myself breathing hard, my hands unsteady with adrenaline, staring at the massive doors that led to the throne room itself. "She's inside," Saris said, her voice hushed. "My mother." We pushed through the doors together, and the sight that greeted us stopped everyone in their tracks. The queen sat upon her throne, frail and clearly ill, but alive, surrounded by a small ring of loyal guards who had apparently held this final position against overwhelming odds. And standing before her, weapon raised, stood Lord Dre himself, his composed mask finally shattered entirely, revealing the desperate fury of a man whose careful plans had unraveled faster than he could adapt to the loss. "Stand down, uncle," Saris said, stepping forward despite Yorvin's hand reaching to stop her. "It's over. Your soldiers have fallen. There is nowhere left for this to go, except surrender." "You do not understand," Dre said, his voice cracking with something between rage and desperation. "I have given everything to this compact. Decades of service, decades of watching your mother's weakness slowly erode everything our ancestors built, while she clung to a throne she no longer had the strength to hold. I did what was necessary." "You attempted murder," Saris said coldly. "Twice, against your own family. There is no version of necessity that justifies that." Dre's weapon wavered, his eyes darting between Saris and the frail queen behind him, calculation warring with the collapse of everything he had worked toward. "If I cannot have the throne," he finally said, something breaking in his voice, "then perhaps it should not exist for you either." He raised his weapon toward the queen, and everything happened at once, too fast for conscious thought, only instinct carrying me forward as I moved between Dre and his target, my own weapon already firing before I fully understood I had made the choice at all. Dre staggered back, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the ceiling as he fell, subdued rather than killed, the fight finally, completely over. Silence settled over the throne room, broken only by ragged breathing and the distant sound of alarms finally beginning to quiet throughout the palace as Dre's remaining forces surrendered or fled. The queen rose slowly from her throne, weak but steady, her eyes moving from her fallen brother to her daughter, and finally settling on me, standing there with a weapon still in my hand and adrenaline still hammering through my veins. "You are the human," she said, her translated voice soft, but carrying easily through the quiet chamber. "The one who pulled my daughter from the wreckage." "Yes, Your Majesty," I managed. "Caleb Hart." "And you just placed yourself between my brother's weapon and my life," she continued. "A life you have no obligation to protect, for a crown that is not your own, in a conflict that belongs entirely to my people." "It seemed like the right thing to do," I said, and I meant it as simply as I had meant every decision since the moment we first answered that distress signal, 3 ships and 1 wrecked transport ago. The queen studied me for a long moment, something complicated moving across her aged features, before she turned to Saris, reaching out to take her daughter's hands in her own frail ones. "You survived," she said, and for the first time since we had arrived, I heard something other than royal composure in her voice, simple maternal relief, raw and unguarded. "Because of them," Saris said, glancing back at me, and the rest of our crew still gathered near the doorway. "Because a human ship answered a distress call they had no obligation to answer, and because they refused to abandon me, even when doing so would have been considerably simpler for everyone involved." The queen's eyes moved back to me, to Grace, to Marsh, who had arrived moments before with the last wave of reinforcements, taking in all of us with an expression that suggested she was recalculating something fundamental about how she understood the galaxy beyond her own borders. "It seems," she finally said, "that we have gravely misjudged your species." Word of what had happened in that throne room spread through the capital within hours, and by the following day, through the wider reaches of compact space entirely. A human crew had answered a distress call from a dying alien vessel. A human officer had stood against an armed usurper to protect a foreign queen. An entire coup, generations in the planning, had been unraveled not by armies or fleets, but by a small scout ship's crew, who simply refused to calculate the cost before choosing to help. Other governments across the region took notice, quietly at first, then with growing unease. If a single human vessel, acting entirely on impulse and conscience, could disrupt a conspiracy this deeply entrenched, what might an entire human fleet accomplish, should they ever choose to act with the same disregard for calculated risk that had defined every choice we had made since that first alarm tore through the Kestrel's corridors. I did not fully understand it then, standing exhausted in that ancient throne room with a weapon still warm in my hand. But the galaxy had just learned something about humanity, that no treaty, no diplomatic exchange, no carefully worded first contact protocol could have taught them nearly as effectively. We did not calculate acceptable losses. We simply helped. And that single, simple truth was about to change everything. Gunfire echoed through the detention corridor just as I arrived to check on the prisoner, and my stomach dropped as I broke into a run toward the sound. 3 days after the coup's collapse, with Dre secured awaiting formal trial before the full compact court, I had allowed myself to believe the worst of the danger had finally passed. That belief shattered the moment I rounded the corner and found 2 of Yorvin's guards exchanging fire with a small group of attackers in dark, unmarked uniforms, clearly some remnant of Dre's network attempting a final, desperate rescue before the trial could proceed. "Hart, get down," one of the guards shouted, and I dropped behind a support pillar as weapons fire chewed through the wall above my head. I had not carried a weapon into the detention wing, not expecting trouble in a section of the palace already secured following the coup's failure, and I cursed my own complacency as I searched for anything I might use to help. Movement caught my eye, one of the attackers breaking away from the main fight, moving toward the detention cell itself with clear intent to free Dre, rather than simply extract him through the chaos. I moved without fully thinking it through, tackling the figure just as they reached the cell door, the 2 of us crashing to the floor in a tangle of limbs. The fight that followed was brief and desperate, and I came out of it with a torn sleeve and a bruised shoulder, but the attacker came out of it disarmed and subdued, Yorvin's guards arriving moments later to finish securing the corridor. "That was reckless," Yorvin said afterward, helping me to my feet, though something like respect colored his voice as he said it. "Wasn't going to let him get free after everything it cost to stop him the first time," I said, breathing hard. Saris arrived minutes later, having heard the commotion from elsewhere in the palace, her expression cycling rapidly from alarm to relief as she found me standing, injured but intact. "You could have been killed," she said, something sharp and frightened in her voice that she did not entirely bother to hide. "So could you, more times than I can count, since this whole thing started," I said. "Guess we're even now." Something in her expression softened, despite the lingering fear, and for a moment, standing in that chaotic corridor with security still clearing the last of the attackers, it felt like the danger that had defined every moment since the rescue had finally, truly, begun to recede. The formal trial took place a week later, in a grand chamber filled with representatives from across compact space, drawn by curiosity as much as duty, to witness the resolution of a scandal that had already reshaped how their government understood its own vulnerabilities. Dre offered no real defense, the evidence against him overwhelming, and the Queen, still frail but visibly stronger than she had been even days before, pronounced judgment with a steadiness that silenced any doubt about her continued fitness to rule. I stood near the back of that chamber, alongside Marsh and Grace, and the rest of the Kestrel's crew who had traveled with us this far, watching a piece of history unfold that we had inadvertently become part of, simply by choosing to answer a distress call 3 weeks earlier. Afterward, the Queen requested a private audience, and I found myself standing before her throne once more, this time without weapons fire or chaos, only the quiet weight of formal gratitude. "The compact owes your people a debt that will not be easily repaid," she said. "Not merely for my daughter's life, though that alone would warrant considerable honor, but for revealing a truth about ourselves we had grown too comfortable ignoring. We had become a civilization that calculated the value of every act of kindness before extending it. Your people showed us there was another way to exist, and I do not think we can simply forget that lesson now that we have learned it." "We didn't do it to teach anyone a lesson, Your Majesty," I said. "We just did what seemed right." "I know," the Queen said, something like warmth entering her aged features. "That is precisely why the lesson lands as powerfully as it does." She turned to Marsh then, formally proposing what would become the first true diplomatic bridge between humanity and the Thren Compact, an alliance built not on the careful, calculated exchanges that typically defined relationships between the galaxy's older powers, but on something far rarer and, as it would turn out, far more valuable. Genuine trust, earned through action rather than negotiated through treaty language alone. Word of what happened at the Compact Court spread quickly to neighboring governments, each reacting with their own mixture of curiosity, caution, and quiet recalculation. A species barely a century into interstellar travel had, through nothing more than instinct and conscience, dismantled a conspiracy that had taken decades to build, defended a foreign throne with no expectation of reward, and in doing so, revealed something the galaxy's older powers had perhaps forgotten was even possible, that strength did not always require calculation, and that kindness, freely given, could reshape entire civilizations more thoroughly than any war ever had. I stood on the palace's highest terrace the evening before the Kestrel was scheduled to depart for home, watching twin moons rise over the silver spires of a city that had, despite everything, begun to feel less foreign than it had 3 weeks earlier. Saris found me there, dressed now in the formal attire befitting her restored position as heir to the throne, though something in her bearing remained as familiar to me as it had been in that dim, red-lit room where we first found her. "You're leaving tomorrow," she said, not quite a question. "Duty calls," I said. "Captain Marsh has a report to file that's going to take considerably longer to explain than it took us to live through it." She smiled at that, though something wistful lingered beneath it. "I do not know how to properly thank you," she said, "for any of it. My life, my mother's throne, an entire civilization's understanding of what it means to help without expectation of return." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "You already did, back on that landing platform, when you stood between me and your uncle's soldiers, even though it would have been easier not to. Easier is rarely the measure I have used to judge my choices. Not since I met you," she said quietly. "I find myself wondering, now, how a single distress signal managed to change so much. Not merely my own fate, but the entire trajectory of two civilizations that barely acknowledged each other's existence a month ago." "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest decisions," I said. "We just happened to be close enough to answer, and stubborn enough not to walk away once we understood what we'd found." Saris turned to look at me fully then, the twin moons casting soft light across features that had become, somewhere in the chaos of the past 3 weeks, far more familiar to me than any strangers should have been. "This will not be goodbye," she said, and it was not quite a question either, more a statement she needed to hear confirmed. "The alliance my mother proposes will require considerable diplomatic exchange in the coming months, considerable cooperation between our peoples. I imagine Captain Marsh will need officers familiar with compact customs for exactly that kind of exchange," I said, allowing myself a small smile of my own. "Strange coincidence that I happen to know one particular member of the royal family rather well by now." "Strange coincidence indeed," Saris agreed, something warm and hopeful passing between us in the quiet evening air. We stood together a while longer, watching the moons climb higher over a city that had nearly fallen to betrayal 3 weeks earlier, and now stood instead as the beginning of something neither species could have predicted when the Kestrel first answered that desperate distress signal. I thought about Captain Marsh's decision to break protocol, about Grace's steady hands holding a dying stranger's life together, about every small, unremarkable choice that had somehow, together, rewritten the galaxy's understanding of what humanity was capable of. We had not set out to change anything. We had simply refused to let someone die when we had the power to stop it. But sometimes that single, simple choice is enough to shift the axis of an entire galaxy, quietly, irreversibly, one distress signal at a time. I saved an alien princess, and then everything changed.